our patients know what presbyopia is?
There are people who are afraid of the press.
Have you talked to your patients about multifocal contact lenses?
I've heard the bifocal, but not multifocal.
Exactly, not multifocal.
Do you need help with your multifocal strategy? Learn more at the conclusion of this episode.
Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MiSight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you. Good morning, I'm Dr. Kerry Gelman. Welcome to Wellness 1280 on Open Your Eyes Radio. Please listen as I discuss the newest information in the world of health, nutrition, sports every Saturday morning, 6 a.m. Central Time on AM 1280 The Patriot. Also, please share your thoughts by emailing me at drkerrygelb@gmail.com. That's drkerry@gmail.com. And visit my new website, wellness1280.com. That's wellness1280.com, where we have all guest links, Wellness 1280 info, and previous shows. We're back with Dr. Joseph Pizzorno. We had an incredible conversation about environmental toxins, something that people really don't know a lot about, but is a contributor to many diseases, such as cancer, diabetes, which we talked about last week, cancer and diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, which we're going to try to talk about this week, kidney disease. And we're with Dr. Joseph Pizzorno. He's the founding president of Bastyr University. He's an ND. He's the author of many books, 6 textbooks for doctors, books for the public. His most recent book, Healthy Bones, Healthy You, that he wrote with his lovely wife. And if you want to get his book, please go to Amazon and you can get his book. Dr. Pizzorno, thank you for rejoining me today.
Thanks for inviting me. Love to have a conversation.
You know, I just love talking about this because I have this desire to help people, and people learning about this can really help them. And last week we were talking about toxins. I want to ask about PCBs, something that has been banned, I believe, since 1977, but I believe it's still in the salmon, that farm salmon that people eat. Another name for farm salmon is Atlantic salmon. But correct me if I'm wrong and tell me about, is PCB still a problem?
Huge. When we look at toxins, people tend to think about them either metal or chemical. And while that's useful, there's a more clinically beneficial way of looking at them: persistent versus non-persistent. So non-persistent toxin means the body can get rid of it pretty easily. So bisphenol A is a good example of non-persistent toxin. Stop exposing yourself to bisphenol A, and within a week, it's all gone out of the body. But non-persistent toxins take hours to days to get rid of. Persistent toxins have half-lives measured in months to years to even decades. And that's where we get to the PCBs. Hugely problematic. So PCBs are what are called polychlorinated biphenyls. So in general, a lot of these synthetic chemicals are used in pesticides and industrial uses, herbicides and such. They put what's called a halogen onto an organic compound. So halogen is fluorine or chlorine or bromine or things of this nature. It turns out that the body has very limited ability to detoxify halogenated compounds. So PCBs are basically organic chemicals with lots of chlorines in them. They have half-lives in humans ranging from 2 years to 20 years, 2 decades. And a half-life is how long it takes to get it out of the body, get half the toxin out of the body. Toxicologists define 4 half-lives as necessary to totally get rid of something. So if you go to a local restaurant and you eat the farm fish on the menu in the local restaurant, the PCBs in that farm fish will likely be in your body for the rest of your life. Why is that problematic? Well, those PCBs do things like cause rheumatoid arthritis in women. Okay, so there's there's disease after disease that's increased when people are exposed to PCBs. Best way to avoid PCBs: never ever eat farm fish. Period. No way around it. Don't eat farm fish.
Is there any way to get it out of the body? We're going to talk about that later.
Yes. So the two main ways to get out of the body, and something we probably should talk about, is how does the body get rid of toxins? Turns out sweating or saunas is one of the most effective way to get PCBs out of the body. These things are so difficult to get rid of, the body kind of sequesters them away. And when the body starts sweating, that opens up a pathway for detoxification. The other way is fiber. The problem with many of these toxins is that while the body goes to a lot of trouble to either detoxify them or bind them to other chemicals and excrete them out into the gut and get rid of them through the stools, well, those systems were developed in the body when we eat a lot of fiber, because by expecting once the liver gets rid of it, to go bind the fiber in the gut and get it out of the body. Well, as we evolved as a species, as we evolved these detoxification systems, we're consuming 100 to 150 grams of fiber a day. Now we're only consuming 15 to 20 grams of fiber a day. So it turns out one of the best ways to get rid of PCBs is to simply increase the amount of fiber being taken. And not only will that help get rid of PCBs, they get rid of a lot of other toxins as well. And of course, your gut is way healthier when you're consuming more fiber.
And what's the best way to get fiber? What would you recommend?
Well, whole foods, beans, for example, beans, whole grains are really very, very good source. Seeds, very good sources of fiber. Now, if you want, you can also take supplemental fibers, and that just comes down to what's most convenient for a person. So either flaxseed or things of this nature.
It's really amazing that it's linked to rheumatoid arthritis, because a lot of people have rheumatoid arthritis, especially we see it in the eye, and as eye doctors, because they're on Plaquenil, and we have to check their eyes to see if they have any macular damage.
Yes.
So let's talk about phthalates and the dangers of phthalates and what they're used for. I mean, other than maybe fragrances, I know they're considered plasticizers, and talk about how they could disrupt androgens and phthalates in general as a problem.
So phthalates are a really interesting group of chemicals, and you can understand why they're used so broadly. Because one of the things they do is they help have things that are oil and water soluble work together more effectively. It's kind of like an emollient. So that's one reason why it's used in so many health and beauty aids, because it helps keep all the ingredients together. So it's also often described as a solvent for fragrances. Okay. So it has a lot of uses for that. So that's not only why you see it on health and beauty aids, but then on plastics. So the plasticizers have two roles. One is they help make the plastic rigid. They also help make the plastic soft or flexible, you might say. So they tend to use both bisphenols and phthalates in order to get that balance of rigidity and flexibility appropriately set up. Now, the problem in the body is these phthalates do things like bind to insulin receptor sites and have people have increased risk for diabetes. Anyway, I can keep talking, but
yeah, I just talk about also blocking the testosterone in men.
So there's a graph I like to show people, and it shows on the one axis the amount of phthalates in a person's body, measured in the urine, what the body's getting rid of, and the other axis is showing, well, what are they using? So you look at someone like me who uses no health and beauty aids whatsoever. I have really low phthalates. I know that because I just measured, okay, low phthalates. But then you add lotion, then you add deodorant, and then you add mouthwash, and then you add hair gel. Start adding all these healthy beauty aids we're talking about. It goes from no phthalates to more phthalates to 300 times as much phthalates in the body of a person using all these health and beauty aids. The 6 in the men and the 12 in the women. These super high levels, and it's almost all coming from health and beauty aids.
Crazy, right? And the whole thing about feminizing men with this type of thing.
I'm sorry, I didn't finish the story. Okay, so anyway, so then you look at the testosterone activity in the male. Okay, and while they may have normal testosterone levels, testosterone is not working very well because the phthalates are blocking the testosterone receptor sites while also promoting the estrogen receptor sites. So you're getting basically a demasculization, feminization of men who are using a lot of these health and beauty aids. So I show this chart. I say to my audience, I say, well, you're using all these health and beauty aids to be more manly, but the problem is you're making yourself less manly if you define testosterone as manliness.
You know, and when it comes to diabetes, smoking, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, smoking could increase your risk of diabetes quite a bit. If you could talk quickly in the last 40 seconds about that.
Sure. So near as I can tell from looking at the research, about 15% of diabetes is due to the air pollution, the polyaromatic hydrocarbons, the particulate matter. And so I do not know what the mechanism is, but I'll tell you the correlation is very, very clear, very, very strong. So what's happening is the particulate matter has what are called volatile organic compounds on them, or pH, polycyclic aromatic carbons, and they bind to them. And the reason that the particulate matter 2.5 is the worst is because it dives most deeply into the lungs.
So we were talking about cigarette smoke at the end about the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and how that could cause cancer and diabetes. So if you could just finish that subject for us.
So the pHs are hugely problematic, and not just for diabetes, but also they play a huge role in cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease. I read one study that was just shocking. They looked at the distance that people lived from a major highway or freeway. They then looked at the levels of pHs in their body, then they looked at their incidence of cardiovascular disease. In this particular study I looked at, those that were within 50 feet of a major highway had a 50% increased risk of cardiovascular disease. You might say, well, 50 feet from a highway, that's not very, that seems unrealistic. Go to any major city and you'll see apartment buildings lining freeways, within 50 feet. But here's the really scary part. 100 yards away, a football field distance from a freeway, still a 17% increased risk of cardiovascular disease because of these PAHs. So the PAHs are problematic. Now, here's where that particulate matter becomes so important. So particulate matter is measured by its size. So you have PM10, okay? That's one of the measures of air pollution. PM10, well, it's not good for us, it's not terrible either, because our lungs are pretty good at keeping it out of the body. When it gets really small to a size of 2.5, which is 2.5 microns, it bypasses the ciliary in the lungs that's protective, it gets into the body. Research has been done in humans and in rats. I'll give you the rat data because it has data we don't have from humans. The rat data shows that within 1 hour, those pHs are found, and the particulate matter itself is found throughout the body. Within 3 hours, it's actually in the brain that the animal is exposed to it. So these PAHs are hugely problematic because not only is the particulate matter itself damaging, but bound to the particulate matter are all the PAHs and VOC, the polyaromatic hydrocarbons and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and the other forms of air pollution. They then bind to these small particulate matter, and because it gets out through the whole body, we now are distributing these toxic chemicals through our whole body, including the brain.
And the best way to get these out of our body?
So the best way is to avoid them. Okay, so I recommend to everybody, if you've got a whole house air conditioner heating system, put a MERV 12 or 16 filter into your air conditioning system. Now the MERV, I use a MERV 16 in our house. It gets rid of 99.9% of the toxins in the air. Extremely effective. And it was so effective that we noticed that we had far less dust in our house as well. That's really important.
Explain what MERV is, just so for the people.
So just a rating. So MERV is a rating to determine how much a filter restricts airflow and how effective it is at blocking particulate matter. So the cheap ones, they don't block much particulate matter and they have a lot of resistance. The good ones, like the MERV 16 I was mentioning, they block out all that particulate matter at 2.5, as well as not restricting airflow very much.
And can people buy these filters at Home Depot?
Yeah, go on Home Depot, Amazon. So the one that I use, the MERV 15 I use, it's a Lennox MERV 15. Now, it's a situation where I'm using a name brand, and the filter replacement is about $200, and I do it every 6 months.
And how about a HEPA filter?
So then that's the next part. So if a person does not have a whole house one, I do recommend a HEPA filter in the areas where they spend the most time, which typically going to be the bedroom and the kitchen or family area. So where people spend the most time, they should have a HEPA filter.
You know, in the first episode, we were talking about diabetes and persistent organic pollutants, you know, the environmental chemicals. And I just want to bring up the statistic, and I would like for you to tell me if you would agree with it, if you saw it, but that if they looked at people with high amount of persistent organic pollutants, I believe 6, and compared to the people in the lowest quintile, and they had a 37 times greater risk of diabetes in the highest quintile versus the lowest quintile. And I would like for you to comment on that and just bring that point home, how these toxins could cause diabetes.
So first off, I was going to say it's so much more fun for me when the interviewer has actually done their homework and studied this area. So you're asking me a lot of great questions. Oh, and I just forgot your question. Sorry, I was more wanted to compliment you. I forgot what you said.
No. So I was talking about the 6 persistent.
Oh yeah, right. Okay. So this is the work of Ducky Lee in South Korea. So she's the person who about 20 years ago first raised a flag on these industrial pollutants causing diabetes. And she went through and looked at them, and she found six that were the worst. And they then looked at the incidence of diabetes in people. So what are these 6? So number 1 is PCBs. Okay, and again, sorry, so hard to get out of the body. PCBs, number 1. Phthalates, number 2. Arsenic, number 3. So I think you can see why I talk so much about those things, because diabetes now accounts for 1 out of every 4 healthcare dollars being spent in the United States. I mean, this is a huge disease, because the problem with people with diabetes is people live with it for a long period of time. So these toxins are not only impairing our blood sugar control, but they're then an indirect measure of how all the other damage is being done in the body. There's a direct correlation with virtually every disease I've seen with 1 or more environmental toxins.
And there was another study of obese people that didn't have high amount of toxins, didn't get diabetes versus obese people with toxins. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was a really important study when I found it. Because I was looking at, why do we have this diabetes epidemic? I mean, 1% when I was in naturopathic medical school a half a century ago, now 13% of the population and 1 out of 3 people is projected to get diabetes in their lifetime. What happened? So I started looking at the various factors. Yep, sugar didn't explain it. But obesity did explain it. But then I saw that work from Ducky Lee, which had looked at the body load of environmental toxins in diabetics and obese people, and found that obese people in the bottom 20% of body load of these diabetogens had no increased risk for diabetes, whereas obese people in the top 20% of body load of diabetogens, 65% of them already had diabetes. Not that increased risk, they already had the diabetes. But then I looked at the data on lean people. Looked at lean people, and ones with low levels of environmental toxins, no diabetes. But those in the top 20% body load of these 6 diabetogens, 30% of them already had diabetes. So it's very clear that diabetogens are the primary cause of diabetes. Not sugar, not fat, not lack of exercise. Not saying those are good for people. So they'll increase risk for diabetes. The biggest factor by far are environmental diabetogens.
And people are running out now and getting semaglutide to lose weight. Now, these toxins could also be an obesogen, can help you gain weight. So if you talk about that a little bit, and if we avoid it, will it help us lose weight?
Yes. So the other term that the researchers use for these chemicals are obesogens, because they induce obesity. Because whenever you induce insulin resistance, you increase the incidence of diabetes. So hugely problematic in many ways.
So I want to talk about lab tests. I want to talk about GGT and the enzyme GGT, which recycles glutathione, and glutathione being the most important molecule in our body for detoxification. So talk about the GGG test and how that relates to diabetes. If it's over a certain amount, I guess optimal we want between maybe 10 and 17, but if it's over a certain amount, our risk of diabetes is much higher. If you could talk about that.
Yes. GGTP is a very interesting enzyme. So it's an enzyme in the liver, and its job is to recycle glutathione. It does other things as well, but its job is to recycle glutathione. Now, in the past, it was part of a standard blood screen. You go to your doctor, get, okay, let's do a standard blood screen. They'd include GTP in order to determine if there's if there's a problem with the liver. Because when the liver gets damaged, it starts leaking enzymes into the blood. So one way we detect liver disease is we measure people's enzyme levels in the blood. They're supposed to be at a certain level. So GTT is quite interesting. So they stopped using it for detecting liver disease because they found other methods that were more reliable. The reason it was not as reliable is because GTT was going up not only in response to liver damage, but our smart bodies were being exposed to environmental toxins. We increased the production of that enzyme to recycle glutathione more quickly to protect us from the toxins. So as you might expect, as GTT levels go up, it's telling us all persons have more toxic exposure, so we're hard to get rid of them. And there's a direct correlation between GTT and diabetes and risk of death and a wide range of other diseases. So GTT in the normal range is 10 to 60. It depends on the lab, some say 10 to 50, but we'll take 10 to 60 as kind of the average. So within the normal range, as GTT goes up from about 25, you get direct increase in diabetes. So going back, now looking at it in general population, and it'll say, look at people with a GTT of 30, this level of diabetes, not very much. GTT of 50, 20 times as much diabetes as a person with a GTT below 25. A GTT of 30, I'm using 25 as our standard, GTT of 30, 8-fold increased risk of diabetes. And one thing that I've seen now, and other my colleagues have seen as well, as we help patients detoxify, the GTT goes down. So that personally,
you said 38 times the risk.
Yeah, so GTT above 50 has 20-fold increased risk. Above 30 has an 8-fold increased risk.
This is Dr. Kerry Gelb. I'm with Dr. Joseph Pizzorno. He's helping us learn about toxins, and this is a fascinating discussion. We're going to be back right after the break. This is Dr. Kerry Gelb for Open Your Eyes Radio on AM 1280 The Patriot.
MacuHealth, your science-born and tested solutions for visual performance, macular degeneration, and dry eye syndrome. New products coming soon. Embrace the science.
We're back with Dr. Joseph Pizzorno, founding president of Bastyr University. He's educating us on environmental toxins and how to get them out of our body to help us stay healthy. This is Dr. Kerry Gelb. For Open Your Eyes Radio, go to my website at wellness1280.com. So, Dr. Pizzorno, please finish on GGT for us.
Well, as I mentioned, I and others have used GTT as a way of monitoring a person's blood sugar level toxicity. There's other measures we use as well. We can talk about if you want to. But the GTT, the good thing about this one is it's easily available. Every standard laboratory test will run. It's not very expensive. So I'll use myself as an example. So I was doing this corporate wellness program in Canada. GTT is one of the things I measured to see how toxic people were. And indeed, I found a lot of GTTs are higher than they should be. And mine was 27. I thought, well, 27, that's pretty good. But then I dug more and more into research. I realized, well, wait a minute. That's still in the range where it's probably increased my risk of diabetes, which tells me I probably have too much toxicity. So I got even more careful about my toxicity. And I ran the test again after about 2 years, it was down to 23. Great, I'm good on good progress. And then again, being more and more careful about toxins. Now starting to grow more and more of my own food. I retested again about 3 years ago. It's down to 16. I just tested it this fall. It's down to 16. So that is where it should be, between about 15 and 20. It gets below 15, means you're probably having trouble producing recycling glutathione enough. If it's above around 20, means you're having to recycle too much because there's too much toxins. So this is my way of monitoring it. And it was pretty good for myself to see that this would change the way I expected it to.
And, you know, we talked about arsenic. There's a funny way of finding how much arsenic. Could you tell us about that?
don't worry.
Arsenic in the toenails?
Oh, the toenails. Okay, yeah. So here's the problem with arsenic, and Alice, the good part of arsenic. The good part of arsenic is it's a non-persistent toxin. So we as a species, human species, we were exposed to arsenic quite a lot as we evolved because it's in a lot of water supplies. So the half-life of arsenic for the average person is between 2 and 4 days. So the problem is if you have a patient who, for example, I'll give you a good example right here in Seattle. So I practice in Seattle, although I'm not practicing now, but I used to practice in Seattle. And you have a patient come in from Eastern Washington who's having health problems and want to come see you. Well, they come from Eastern Washington, they spend a couple of days, going to Costco to get groceries and going to movies, the theater and such, and they don't see you until actually 4 days after they've left their home. Well, at that point, if there's arsenic in the water supply, and it turns out there's a lot of arsenic in Western Washington, well, the arsenic would have gone down too low and I wouldn't have picked it up. So that's when you start using toenail arsenic, because it gives you the average amount of arsenic over about a 3-month period of time.
Wow, that's very interesting.
And by the way, and toenail arsenic directly correlates with diabetes.
Wow, that's really interesting. How about urine? What's the problem with using urine for toxins?
So urine has the big advantage of just being easy to get, okay? And it's not particularly damaging to the environment if it leaks and things of this nature. The disadvantage is that it's only going to show you what the body is getting rid of. And there are many toxins. If you want to look into this more, you might find of interest. In fact, if you can get an interview with him, you should do so. Dr. Stephen Genuis up in Edmonton, Alberta. So Stephen's a MD of specializing in environmental medicine. He's done a lot of great work on this. So he's
learned a lot about sweating, and we talked about that before.
Exactly. So what he did is, we've always thought about sweating as a way of detoxifying. So he took a bunch of people, took 10 people, put them in a sauna, collected their sweat to see what was in it. And he also collected their blood and collected their urine. He found toxins in the sweat that were not in the blood or in the urine, because they're so hard on the body, so hard for you to get rid of. The body's trying to sequester it away to have as minimum damage as possible. So when people are sweating, our body's got a mechanism for getting rid of it. So sweating turns out to be very, very useful. If you think about it.
About sweating, not to interrupt, but we talked about sauna. Is infrared, Swedish, or sitting in a hot sun in Florida in the summer? Is there a difference?
Yeah, so that's exactly the question I asked him. After I saw that lecture, of course, people find me challenging to ask. I sometimes ask hard questions. And he said, it doesn't matter. All that matters is if you're sweating. So if you're a runner, you're sitting in the sauna, you're sitting in the sun, doesn't matter as long as you're sweating. Take plenty of fluids. And I recommend when you're taking those plenty of fluids, when either in the sauna or in the sun, try to do a little bit of alkalinization while you're doing it. Because when you do more alkalizing fluids, it makes it easier for the cells to get rid of the toxins. And by alkalize, I mean things like have potassium citrate or magnesium bicarbonate in the water.
And before we were talking about getting rid of the toxic load, detoxifying, avoidance, as you said, is the best. We want to increase glutathione. What are the best ways to increase glutathione? Do you recommend taking liposomal glutathione? Do you recommend precursors like NAC? What do you think is the best way? Whey protein? What is the best way to do it?
Yeah. So the cheapest, most convenient way is with N-acetylcysteine. So taking 500 milligrams of N-acetylcysteine twice a day will increase the red blood cell levels of glutathione by about 30%. You get the same thing by consuming about 16 grams of whey powder. It'll do the same thing. So the promotion of glutathione is worthwhile. Now, if you want to speed up as much as possible, you can use liposomal glutathione, either as topical or as an oral agent. Glutathione by itself, that's not modified, is a pretty expensive way to increase glutathione levels because it's broken down in the gut too effectively. So that's why I find NAC much more effective, or topical glutathione. It's the best way of doing it.
And how about when we're talking about resveratrol, for arsenic, like resveratrol, B vitamins? Tell us about that.
So let's look at the B vitamins and arsenic. The way the body gets rid of arsenic is through something called methylation. If you in your audience may have heard of something called homocysteine. When a person has elevated homocysteine levels, it means they're having troubles with methylation, which means after being exposed to arsenic, they have trouble with arsenic as well. Because without enough methyl groups, the body can't detoxify arsenic as effectively as it should. So that's one of the things I do with people with arsenic toxicity. I always check their homocysteine levels. And if they're high, then we give them
Real
methylated B
quick,
vitamins.
one thing. I've had a patient that had pretty much normal homocysteine. They came in, all of a sudden it jumped up like 15 when it was regularly 8. What do you think that usually would mean? Does that mean you think
I suspect there's certain foods that have eaten at high levels, the homocysteine could go up, but I haven't seen research on it, so I don't want to guess.
Okay, and how BPA, alpha lipoic acid, some of the
Then you mentioned resveratrol. So I was really curious about that because the from our research that shows that when things like resveratrol are given to both animals and humans, their glutathione levels go up. So the early thinking was it was promoting production of glutathione. It turns out the way most of those things are working is by doing the antioxidant and detoxification effect work that glutathione was doing. So the body does not need as much, does not use up the glutathione as quickly. So that's why the glutathione levels are higher. Pretty interesting. So they're worth doing, but it's not because they're increasing glutathione production. It's rather decreasing the need for glutathione.
Interesting. And how about like BPA, some probiotics and alpha lipoic acid? How does
All useful. So many of these nutrients are useful on kind of like an everyday basis to promote health. But when there's a health problem, sometimes we want to use a lot more. So for example, somebody with diabetes, well, the alpha lipoic acid is extremely useful for people with diabetes because it dramatically decreases their risk of getting the side effects of diabetes like kidney failure and loss of peripheral nerves and peripheral blood supply and things of this nature.
How about bile sequestrants that have been used to lower cholesterol levels?
Yeah. So bile sequestrants are very effective at getting rid of PCBs. So one of the studies I show people are Pringles. Pringles used to be made with olestra, not made anymore. But Pringles made with olestra, when you have people eat them, they decrease their cholesterol levels, but they also decrease their PCB levels as well.
But it's not made with that anymore. We don't want people eating processed foods, right?
Yeah, no.
So
that's one of the rare examples where I actually prescribe to patients processed foods like those Pringles because it helps get rid of their PCB levels.
The body spends a lot of energy getting rid of toxins. I remember Dr. Sid Baker, very famous doctor, 25% of all your energy is used to get rid of toxins. And we produce internal toxins.
Yes.
When we break down hormones like estrogen or testosterone, we could break it down in a good way, which is non-cancerous, or we could break it down in a bad way, which could be carcinogenic. Can you speak to that?
Yes, that's very well said. When we're thinking about our hormones and such, we think about all the great things they do. You make us men more manly, make women more feminine. That's fine. But once the hormone's done its job, what happens to it? Well, it turns out that depending upon a person's genetics, depending upon the environmental toxic load, and depending upon the nutritional status, determines whether estrogen, for example, is broken down to a form of estrogen, which is anti-carcinogenic, or broken down to a form of estrogen, which is pro-carcinogenic. So look at estrogen. Why do women who eat more cabbage have lower levels of breast cancer? Because when women consume cabbage, they promote the enzymes that detoxify estrogen to the anti-carcinogenic pathway. Conversely, women who smoke or eat a lot of, for example, charbroiled food, increase the risk of breast cancer because those things like pHs and such promote the detox of estrogen into the pro-carcinogenic pathways for estrogen. So diet has a huge impact on how well our body detoxifies both our normal endogenous chemicals, you might say, as well as the ones that are exposed to the environment.
And we're finishing up in the last 40 seconds here. Gut bacteria, that could go against us or help us. Talk about that quick also.
Age-old naturopathic adage, disease begins in the gut. Okay. Another age-old naturopathic adage, when in doubt, detoxify the liver. Okay. So it turns out as you know, we have 10 times as many bacteria in our gut as we have cells in our body.
We were talking about the gut And we were talking about internally produced toxins, and we're talking about the gut, and disease begins in the gut. So talk to us a little bit about that.
One thing I try to do when teaching about toxins is have people not get blinders on and think it's only environmental toxins. Yes, we have environmental metals and chemicals, but we also have endogenously produced chemicals like estrogen and testosterone. Why has men handle them? Inflammatory chemicals. Well, once they got their message out, they got to be detoxified. So our bodies spend a lot of energy detoxifying normal things. But we also have another class of toxins I like to tell people about, and that's toxins of choice. People drink alcohol. It's a toxin, depletes glutathione. Not saying you don't do it, but recognize consuming alcohol, you're depleting glutathione. Marijuana. Well, marijuana, when it's grown illegally, tends to be grown indoor with grow lights and such. They have a huge problem with fungus and things of this nature. So indoor marijuana is sprayed with all these herbicides and pesticides and fungicides and such. So when you smoke that stuff, it's a really effective way of getting toxins into your body. Another example is salt. We need some salt, but we consume so much salt now that we impair the kidney's ability to get rid of toxins because they haven't got rid of all this salt. Another one is wheat. The person, most people don't realize this, but for about 1/4 of the population, in my opinion, wheat is the poison for them because it causes the gut to become inflamed and leak bacterial metabolites into the body in an uncontrolled manner. So you have to look at choices people are making. Then we look at the gut. You know, a healthy gut has all these bacteria that make the body work better. But when you're taking a lot of antibiotics or eating foods that have been contaminated with toxic organisms, now these organisms in the gut are producing molecules that are damaging to us and doing things like damaging the mucous membranes of the gut, which then allows the contents of the gut to leak into the body without the normal controls. I'll give you an anecdote. Patient came to see me who had ulcerative colitis, and her doctor had been giving her drugs, and drug after drug was failing, and she's now told the next thing was she'd have to have her colon removed and have a colon bag hanging from her abdomen. And so she came to see me, and I know a lot about ulcerative colitis. I went through my normal procedure of, well, let's get rid of food allergens, get good nutrients, we see a proper bacteria into your gut. And she got maybe a quarter better, but she's still having symptoms, still having to take drugs. So then on her own, she'd learned about using fecal transplants. So she asked me about fecal transplants, and yeah, that's a good idea. Just by the way, about 10 years ago. I said, but at this point, the legality of it, for me as a doctor to do it is problematic. But she said, that's fine, I'll go on the internet and do it. So she went on the internet, found the protocol, used her father's fecal material, did the fecal transplant, and her symptoms decreased dramatically. One time. She did a second time 30 days later. All her symptoms were gone. She was gone off of all the drugs. And when she came to see me 6 months after doing this, as our follow-up, she said, all my symptoms are gone, and now my farts smell like my dad's.
Oh, geez.
So I thought it was really interesting. Because what happened is she got rid of the wrong bacteria in her gut. Now, why did she have the wrong bacteria in her gut? Because at age 9, she was having chronic urinary tract infections. So her pediatrician put her on daily broad spectrum antibiotics. Guess what happened? Within a year, she was having gastric upset. Within 3 years, she was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. So it was caused by the medical intervention. And by putting the right bacteria back into her body, it totally got rid of it. So we ask, how powerful is the gut? Gut plays a huge role in our everyday health, but also our resistance to disease.
I want to switch now to heavy metals, lead, which could increase the risk of heart attacks, and then mercury. If you could talk a little bit about that.
So there's good news around lead. When we finally realized how bad lead was in the general population, we started to decrease it. And by the way, this brings up an example of where we have problems with other standards. In general, the way the standards are determined for whether something's toxic or not is, are you in the top 5% of the general population of by load of that toxin? So by definition, if you're bottom 95%, you're fine. About 5%, you're problematic. So that was how the standard was set for lead, and it was set at 60 micrograms per deciliter of blood. It's an unusual measure. It was set at 60. But they find that people at 60 were having all this heart disease, children losing their IQ and such. So that's back in 1960. So about every 10 years, they would drop the level, drop the level. The level is now 10 in adults and 5 in children. So the problem is lead is hugely toxic. So as the researchers started realizing this, we got Congress say, okay, let's get lead out of gasoline, get lead out of paint. And then you look at people's blood levels, average blood levels of the population have gone down, except older people like myself, my age group. We formed all our bones when the environment was saturated with lead. So that means when people get older and lose their bones, it's usually see more in women than in men, those blood levels of lead go up as it's coming out of the bone. And then of course, when you start seeing all the heart attacks and the dementia and such, it's older in life and people losing bone and letting not just lead in the bone come out, but mercury comes out as well.
Talk to me about mercury, about fish. You know, difference between a sardine and big fish. Big fish having almost 1,000 times as much
1,000 times as much, yes.
as sardines. Talk to me about that and the dangers of mercury.
Yeah, basically the rule of thumb is the bigger the fish, the higher levels of mercury. There's also another rule of thumb, the more the fish eats near bays of industrialized countries, the more chemical pollution that it has as well. So good thing about sardines is very low lead levels of mercury, very low levels of mercury. They have more chemical pollutants than I would prefer. But when you look at the big fish, for example, Chilean sea bass is one of the worst. It has 1,000 times as much mercury.
Wow.
So I believe fish is a good food for us, but realize that when you're eating fish, you must make sure it's only small fish, make sure there's plenty of fiber in your diet, and make sure you're taking N-acetylcysteine on a regular basis, because that N-acetylcysteine will increase glutathione levels, and glutathione binds directly to mercury to both neutralize it and you get it out of the body.
What symptoms of mercury toxicity?
Almost all neurological. So a person's having short-term memory problems, foul taste in the mouth, so their hands are shaking a little more than they expect. Memory problems, the kind of foggy memory. That's one of the earliest signs of mercury toxicity.
Talk to me about getting it out, chelating with DMSA, that protocol.
So mercury is an intermediate toxin. The half-life in the body is about 30 days. So not terrible, but you got to stop the exposure. Here's something that's very interesting. Then this was actually done in human, reproduced from animals. The body dumps into the gut 1% of the total body load of mercury every day, and then reabsorbs 95% of it because of enterohepatic recirculation. And why is that? Because of what I said before, not enough fiber in the diet. So if all you want to do is the safest possible way of doing things, simply increasing fiber in the diet, will get the mercury down. Now, having said that, but not if they have a mouthful of silver amalgams. So a person has silver fillings, so-called amalgam fillings, well, they're 55% mercury. And I remember reading a study that was so funny. I mean, not funny in a kind of disastrous sort of way. They showed that if you have a person with fillings, you measure the levels of mercury in the blood, in the urine, to a certain level. And then when you give them a chelation therapy, like with DMSA, like I mentioned before, DMSA is really good at getting mercury out of the body. Getting the DMSA, I prefer oral because it's safer, but this study did IV because it's faster. They showed, look, dramatic drop in the levels of mercury in the blood and in the urine. But then 24 hours after they stopped the therapy, it came back to where it was before. And so their response was, see, it's ineffective therapy. No, it was effective therapy, but they still have the fillings in the mouth leaking mercury into the body. So it's like, you have to deal with the cause. So going back to the mercury thing, yes, fiber will increase its excretion from the body. Glutathione is really important, and NAC is a good way of getting it up to protect from the mercury get out of the body. If you got a mouthful of silver fillings, you got to get them removed by an ecological dentist. It has to be an ecological dentist, not a regular dentist, because if you drill out the mercury fillings, you release all the mercury to the brain.
So we're almost done with the show, but real quick, yes, thumbs up or down on fulvic acid and zeolite.
So zeolite in environmental cleanup works very, very well. Does it work in humans? I just have not found any good research to tell me whether it works in humans or not. And fumaric acid, I'm aware of it. I haven't studied independently, so I can't have a good answer.
All right, we're going to leave it at that. Thank Dr. Joseph Pizzorno for joining me. If people want to find out about you, how could they do it?
I'll go to my website, drpizzorno.com. But more importantly, go to Amazon, buy my book, Toxin Solution, read it and do it. Okay. Don't just read it. You got to do it.
This is Dr. Kerry Gell for Open Your Eyes Radio on AM 1280 of The Patriot. Until next week, thank you for joining me. And thank you to Dr. Joseph Pizzorno, the great Dr. Joseph Pizzorno. Thank you very much.
Your eyes and your vision are under attack, damaging blue light from the sun. Your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
Fitting multifocal contact lenses presents a big opportunity to meet patient needs while growing your practice. Alcon is your partner not only with our innovative portfolio, but through e-learning. Learn to enhance your multifocal strategy today with the Alcon Experience Academy.
OIE Broadcasting is the emerging leader in social media.
We use scientific entertainment to drive more patients into your office.
Visit oiebroadcasting.com and sign up today.